Wakusu family, we're back with another Pan-African family cooking show. Today we're going to talk about some healthy meal planning options that center around the idea of using one ingredient in multiple ways. This ingredient we're going to use in a variety of different applications that can be very easily used as a vegan, a vegetarian, or even a pesce vegetarian, meaning use of fish or seafood diet. The item that we're going to use is beans, and the reason why I want to talk about vegetarian and vegan eating is because the health benefits are pretty pronounced. And in our community, where we are battling medical racism and healthcare stigmas and obstacles, it's important for us to take control of and own the ways that we can be in charge of our own health. There is no better way to take charge of our health as Black people than to harness the power of what we put into our bodies. An interesting point about vegan eating, vegan meaning the consuming of a plant-based diet that excludes most or all animal products or things that are derived from animals. The interesting thing about that here in this country is that veganism it's still a very sort of fringe dietary element. You hear a lot about it on TV and on social media. When you go to the grocery store, you see lots of plant-based options and lots of meat-free options. But in reality, in the United States, only about 2 to 3% of the population is vegan. However, in the African American community, in the Black community, that number jumps to 8%. 8% of Black people in the United States have chosen a plant-based vegan diet. That's significant. Well, it's not significant from an overall numbers. From a percentage standpoint, it is significant because that means that while the face of veganism is usually a white guy or a white woman who lives in places like Brooklyn or Portland or Los Angeles, and that's sort of the face of veganism, the actuality of the matter is that Black people are choosing this diet. They're choosing to go plant-based for largely health reasons and as a form of resistance against the establishment. So what I want to do today is take you through a couple of different recipes. We're going to use beans as our central vegan element, and I want to show you the ways that you can use this very, very versatile ingredient in ways that make your meal planning both simple and interesting, but also allow you to harness some of the health benefits of a vegan or vegetarian diet, even if you aren't making a full tilt switch to that diet. So one of the dishes that we're going to make actually will involve a meat, in this case a seafood option, showing you the versatility of using this ingredient. Let's get started. Like I mentioned, the main ingredient that we're going to use are beans. These are a small red bean that I prepared. You could use any kind of bean, a black bean, a chickpea, even a lentil. The type of bean is not that important. I just happen to have red beans on hand, and this was what I made this week. We're going to use brown rice. You'll notice that in this rice, and the reason why we're using brown rice is because, one, it's a healthier option. It's got more protein and fiber than if you were using white rice. It's starchier and a little bit more gummy. And you'll notice here that I actually have cooked the rice so that it's got a little bit of a crust on it. This is going to be important when we're going to make some of the burgers and the vegetarian balls that we're going to use. We're going to want that mouthfeel and that consistency as we compose them. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. We've got some vegetables that we're going to use to augment our meal. We've got green peas, we've got some breadcrumbs, we've got some artichokes here, we've got olives, we've got some roasted red peppers in olive oil, which is an interesting ingredient that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. We've also got mushrooms, and in this case, what I've done is I've just taken off the stems from the mushroom, and we're actually going to focus on just using the mushroom stems. A lot of people throw these away, but we're going to show that you can actually use these stems as part of your recipe. And then we've got two different kinds of potatoes. We've got a regular white potato, and then we've got a sweet potato. We're going to use both. And then the other two ingredients that are interesting, we're going to use some leftover pasta water. Whenever I make pasta, I like to save the water because it's a little bit salty and very, very starchy, and I just put it in a jar and refrigerate it. I use that for sauces. We're going to make a bean sauce. I use it in soups as well, especially if you're going vegetarian and you aren't using a chicken or a beef stock. Supplementing or augmenting the stock of your soup with pasta water is a very good tip. Next to it, this is actually the water, the liquid that I use to cook the beans in. The bean broth or the bean liquid is essentially a stock. This is the stock from the beans that I cooked. I always preserve this because I can use it again as a supplement or a base to make soups. I can use it to make a sauce, which is what we're going to do with it. I can also use it to thin out things like a puree that we're also going to go through and we're going to make. Coming over here, we've got a little whole wheat flour that we'll be using to do a little bit of frying. I've got a piece of salmon that we're going to use. Then we've got our spice array. We've got salt. In this case, we're going to use pink Himalayan salt just for some more flavor. When you're working with vegetarian and vegan options, you want to make sure that you pay extra special attention to your flavor profiles and enhancing them as much as you can. We're going to use a spice combination that's really, really interesting here, coriander and fennel, which I've already gone ahead and ground up. When you use those two ingredients together, along with salt, pepper, and garlic, it gives you a very meaty flavor. So it's a way to create a meat sensation, a meat flavor profile in vegetarian dishes. We've got a little smoked paprika and some tarragon that we're going to use in our fish. We've got some parsley, little ground red pepper for heat. We've got some garam masala, which is an Indian spice that's going to give us a nice flavor to some of the things that we do with our beans, a little bit of nutmeg, and of course olive oil. We've also got our powdered garlic, as well as fresh garlic, and then we've got some ground cumin to round out our spice array. And then from a utensil standpoint, we've got our measuring cups, our spatulas, and our spoons. I've got some water boiling that we're going to get to in just 1 second, and then we're going to use a pot on the stove to do a little bit of the frying of our various ingredients. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do, I've got a pot here that's just coming to a nice boil. It's very, very, very salty water. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to drop my potatoes in. You'll notice I've already sliced them. So I'm going to go ahead and drop both the sweet and the white potatoes in the salty water. Just make sure that they get in there. I'm going to go ahead and cover those. And while we're working on the rest of the ingredients, this will come to a parboil, which means sort of partially cooked. I'm going to basically half cook them so that I can pan fry them along with the salmon later on in the meal composition. The other thing that I'm going to do is I've got a cast iron skillet here that I've got some olive oil in, and it's on an extremely low light that's been going for a little while, so that by the time I'm ready to start cooking these potatoes and our piece of salmon, the pan will be at a nice heat and nice temperature. It'll be scorching hot just before the smoke point, and that will assist in speeding up the meal prep and the cooking time. So to get started, we're going to create most of the preparation of these various components right here in the food processor. We're going to start from the least moist or the driest component and continue to add to it to add flavors and moisture so that we work on our patty first and then go all the way down to our sauce at the end. So to get started, I'm going to take a measuring cup. We're going to do 1 cup of our bean mixture. Now these beans I prepared, they've been seasoned, they've got some green pepper, and they've got some onion in them. If you had created a plain preparation of the beans, you could also add in those spice and seasoning elements to it. But these beans are already seasoned and flavored, so that's going to help to give more flavor to the dish that we're creating. The next thing that I'm going to add is some brown rice. I talked before about how brown rice, because of its fiber and protein components, are a much better option than using white rice. And also that in this particular application, I made sure to cook the rice so that it had sort of a crust on the bottom because I wanted to have a crunchier sensation, a more toothsome feel, so that again, it would approximate or give the illusion of a more meat-like experience, especially for people who aren't vegan, who aren't vegetarian. You're trying to get, your dad or your brother or a real meat eater to try some of these dishes. It's good to help approximate something that they're already familiar with. In this case, I'm going to do an equal measure, so 1 cup of brown rice. And then, so the next ingredient I'm going to add is just a 1/2 cup of croutons. In this case, these are Italian seasoned. You could use any kind of crouton that you wanted. If you were really feeling adventurous, you could make your own croutons, but I think that's a lot more work than is necessary. The croutons, like creating a little bit crunchier rice, is again going to help to add texture to the bean dish so that we aren't working with something that's too mushy, so that it has crunch to it. And because there is already some oil in these croutons, it's also going to help when we later cook it to give a crust, sort of a sear to the elements that we create, both the meatballs and also the patty that we're going to create. So we'll add that. Next, I want to add some seasoning. And for that seasoning, I'm going to go ahead and add 1 tablespoon of the spice mixture. In this case, it is fennel and coriander seed that I've already ground. I'm going to go ahead and add that directly to the food processor. I'm going to go ahead and add roughly a teaspoon of smoked paprika. I'm going to add roughly a teaspoon of parsley. And then I'm going to add black pepper, about a teaspoon. I'm going to add a little bit of ground red pepper, cayenne pepper, for some heat, about a teaspoon. And then I'm going to add 1 garlic clove. And just to help the food processor out, I'm going to chop it up a little bit before I add it in. I'm going to add 1 chopped up garlic clove. And to help balance that out, I'm going to add a teaspoon of powdered garlic and a little bit of cumin, about a teaspoon of cumin. And then lastly, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of pink Himalayan sea salt. The reason I'm adding more salt is that while the beans have salt in them and the croutons do have salt in them, the brown rice, when I prepared it, is completely bland. I don't season the rice when I make it because I want to be able to control the salt content of it. So I'm going to add a pinch of pink Himalayan sea salt. So it's a little bit less than a teaspoon, just a pinch of it. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and pulse the food processor. You'll notice that we've got a pretty granular consistency. You can still see some of the rice, but the beans have pretty much all been dissolved, been chopped up, and they're not that recognizable. So we're almost where we want to be for this first application. I'm actually going to just pulse it a little bit more. Scrape it down. What you're looking for is a well-incorporated mixture. You want it to be sort of the consistency of a very dry dough is what you're looking for, which we are almost there. You want to still be able to see some pieces of the main ingredients. You want to see some of the rice kernels and some of the beans. you shouldn't be seeing any of the croutons. Those should break up and dissolve pretty quickly. And obviously you want to make sure that all of your spices are well incorporated. So I've gone ahead and taken out about half of the mixture that we made in the food processor. And now we're gonna go ahead and make our patties. So I'm going to probably make, I don't know, maybe 2, maybe 3, we'll see. Just take a handful out and massage it together. Again, because we made it the consistency of a dry dough, it should be pretty pliable. And you wanna get it, work it in, just knead it a little bit in your hands to get it as close to round as possible. And then just start flattening it out until it forms into something the shape of a patty. And this is entirely up to you. You control how round it is, you control how big it is, you control how thick it is. And remember, because this is already, all of the components of this have been cooked, you don't really have to worry about its ability to cook through. What you're going to do is try to get a nice little crust on it and make sure that it's warmed through. But the thickness of it isn't going to be as important because you're not working with a raw product. So I've got one, let's see what we get here. Maybe a second one. You want to strive for them to be roughly the same size, which these look like they are. You can make them as pretty as you want after the fact. Again, they're pretty pliable. And since I've only got this little bit left, we're just gonna go with 2 and I'll just throw this back into the food processor. So now that we're on the stove cooking the first component of our meal, the first thing I wanna do is go ahead and get my parboiled potatoes out of the water. We're gonna go ahead and scoop those up, strain them, and just drop them into a bowl and let them hang out and wait. I want them to cool down a little bit. You'll notice how they're still firm, they're not falling apart. That's how I want them. I'm not going for mashed potatoes here. So we'll move on from that. The next thing that we're gonna do is we're going to cook up the first 2 patties that we've made. I've had a skillet with some olive oil heating up on the pan, and I don't know if you can see, but we're right at the smoke point. Boom. So we're ready to go ahead and put these patties on the stove. And the reason we want a nice hot pan is, again, there's not much cooking involved in this. These patties have already been cooking when they were beans and when they were rice. They've already been cooked through. So all we're trying to get now is a nice crust and warm through. So we want a high heat to get a good crust or a good sear on the outside of each of these patties. Like any good burger, you want to put it down on the pan and then leave it alone. I'm doing my best to fan away some of the smoke because I'm not turning the blower on so you guys can actually hear what's going on. But you can hear that sizzle. That's what you're looking for. And hopefully you won't hear a smoke alarm. So we'll go ahead and turn these over. And you'll notice, look at that, we've got a very nice sear on one side already. In a matter of seconds, we got that. We'll do the same thing to the other side. Next up, we're going to take the remaining bean mixture, the sort of dough-like substance that we've created, and we're going to augment it. We're going to add to it to create the next phase of our meal. In this case, we're going to create sort of croquettes, which have a somewhat mushier inside, if you can think about a salmon croquette or even a crab cake perhaps. We're gonna make something that's a little bit closer to that, except we're gonna do them in the form of balls. So we'll fry those up as well. In this case, we wanna, again, add to and augment and change the flavor of those. We want these to be a little bit more substantial. We're gonna make sure that they're moist inside since they'll be a little bit thicker. So we're gonna add a little bit more of a vegetable component to them. First off is we're going to go ahead and take some of the crushed, fire roasted red peppers. We'll drop those in, maybe 3 of those. And I'm gonna give it just a little bit of the olive oil that they're cooked in. I'm then going to take some artichokes. I'm just gonna chop those up roughly and drop in some artichokes. Break those up for the food processor so they incorporate nicely. And these are artichoke hearts. They were just jarred artichoke hearts in water. You could, of course, roast your own or steam your own artichokes and go through the trouble of peeling them if you wanted to. That's up to you. But the jarred variety that have already been plucked and the hearts pulled out is a much, much easier way to go. Then gonna add a little bit of green olive with pimento or red pepper in the middle. Just add a few of those. That's gonna add a briny, salty flavor to it. And then, as I mentioned before, I'm going to take the stems of the portobello mushrooms. These are a little bit tougher. They're very, very woody. They're a meatier consistency. That's gonna go ahead and give you a nice sort of meatball-ish experience when you're eating those. They're gonna add a lot of flavor and a lot of heft to the meatballs, the vegetarian meatballs that we're going to compose. Just gonna break those up for the food processor. I'm gonna use 2 of the stems. Okay, gonna get and put the top back on. And we're going to, again, pulse this. And what we're looking for here is a much wetter consistency, a much more moist consistency to our finished product. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of starchy pasta water. We'll check it out and then we'll push the sides down. So if you can see now, this has got a much more sort of ground beef texture and consistency that we're working with. We still have got some of the components that we can see. There's a little bit of the loose artichokes. We're probably going to go ahead and let this go a little bit longer in the food processor. I'm actually going to add a little bit more seasoning. I'm just going to give it some more salt and a little bit more of that fennel and coriander mixture, just to make sure that we get the additional vegetables that we added seasoned. And then we'll go ahead and let this go a little bit longer. So we've taken about half of the mixture out. You can see that it sort of looks like a ground beef kind of a mixture. We've got our whole wheat flour, and it's important that we've dusted our workstation. You can see I've already started to make some of our little vegetarian balls. I'm going to make sure that I flour my hand and workstation, and it's fine if I get some on the existing balls because I want them to be well floured. And I'm just going to take a little bit in my hands and then start to form these balls, and I want them to be roughly the same size. Again, it's already a pretty cooked product, so it's not a question of wanting them to cook all the way through. It's just a question of them being the same size so that they cook at the same time. Once I drop them into the frying oil, these will be fried. And then I'm going to make sure that I get the outside coated in flour, which is going to help develop a nice crispy crust. Line those up. Make a few more. Maybe 6 is good. So I've got a combination of olive and canola oil. The canola just because it has a higher smoke point. The olive oil because it's a little bit heart healthier oil, since we are going to fry these. I want it to be roughly 160 to 170 degrees so I get a really good quick deep fry. I test that by throwing a little bit of the flour off my fingers in there. If I get a good sizzle, then I'm probably good to go. I'm going to go ahead and drop these balls in. You'll notice that I'm shaking them around in my hands, sort of like the way that you'd roll dice. That's just to get the round shape back, because if they've been sitting on the plate before I drop them, they can sometimes lose their shape, and I want them to be as round as possible. So just before I drop them, I shake them around just to get their shape back. And I'm gonna just drop 4 of them because I don't want to overcrowd the pot while I'm frying. And similar to the patties that we cooked, these should fry up pretty quickly. We should get these to cook pretty quickly. Again, when you're frying, you want to put your protein into the oil or onto the pan and then just leave it alone for the amount of time that it takes to cook. In the case of these, we're going to want to look to cook them for about 2 to 3 minutes in the oil, just long enough to get them warmed all the way through and develop a nice crunchy brown crust. All right, and as you can see, we get a nice golden brown, a nice crisp crust on the outside. You go ahead and put these down on a tray with some paper towel, and then, like we do with any good frying, we take a pinch of salt and just dust them with a little salt to add some final seasoning element and let that soak in. You want to do that as soon as you take them out of the oil so that the salt soaks in the most. The next thing we're going to make is a puree. The nice thing about a puree is that it can be used as a topping. You can take a puree of beans or vegetables and put them on top of a burger. You can put them on top of grits. You can use them in a lot of ways. You can even use them as a component unto themselves. So we're going to go ahead and make a nice bean puree. We've got the sort of ground consistency that we've been working with. To that, we're actually going to just add a lot of the same elements that we've already added from a flavor standpoint, just to bulk it up. And then we're going to add a lot more moisture than we've had before. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add another 1/2 cup of beans. The reason I'm doing that is I want it to be very, very bean forward. This is a bean puree and I want it to taste like beans. So I've added another 1/2 cup of beans. I'm not going to add any more rice to this because there's enough rice and enough of that grainy consistency, but I am going to go ahead and add the last remaining mushroom. That's going to be a nice complement to the bean flavor, and again, it's going to add a richness and a meaty consistency, a little bit of a heft to the puree and the sauce that we're going to make after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and add in the last of those briny olives, 2 more of the red peppers, and I'm going to go ahead and add just 1 more artichoke. The artichoke is going to add a little bit more moisture. I'm not as interested in artichoke flavor. It's more of the texture and the moisture that it adds. So I'm just going to use 1 of the artichoke hearts. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more of the seasoning mixture. But what's going to be different this time around is that I'm going to add a garam masala, which is an Indian spice, because I want to change the flavor profile. Because if I want to add this, say, to the veggie balls that we made or the bean patties that we made, I don't want to have the exact same flavors. I want to add depth of flavor. I want things to be a little bit different. So I'm going to add about a tablespoon of garam masala because I really want that to be forward. I'm going to add a little bit of nutmeg because I always add nutmeg when I use an Indian spice. Cinnamon and nutmeg, those are very, very complementary spices. So about a teaspoon of nutmeg. I'm going to add just a touch of tarragon. And I'm going to add a little bit more cumin. I'm going to go ahead and add a little more salt. And I'm not going to use the coriander and fennel spice mixture because I'm not really interested in approximating or replicating a meat finish to this particular dish. I'm going to go ahead and start the food processor. And while I have it on, I'm going to drizzle in more olive oil. gonna scrape down the sides. And you'll notice now that we've got something that's not quite liquid. It's sort of in between a mashed potato and a pudding-like consistency. That's what we're looking for. We want something that if we put it on a plate, we can easily spread it. It's not something that we could actually form into a shape. We couldn't make a ball out of this. We couldn't really make a patty that would hold together. That's the consistency that we're looking for. You'll notice that all of the ingredients are well incorporated. I think that we could probably let this go just a little bit more. I see a little bit of the red pepper and a little bit of the artichoke still visible, so I might let it pulse just for a couple of more seconds. But that's essentially the consistency that we're looking for. One smooth, fully incorporated mixture. The next step to go from a puree to a sauce with, again, the same bean mixture is pretty simple. Again, I want to change the flavor profile, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in, and I've already cut them up very, very roughly, this is 3 more cloves of fresh garlic, because I want to have a garlicky flavor to my sauce. And then I'm going to turn the food processor on. I'm going to add 2 liquid components. I'm going to add the bean stock, which is the liquid that I used to cook the beans in originally. It's also known as aquafaba. And I'm going to use some of the starchy, salty cooking liquid that I made some pasta in and preserved and jarred. So we're going to go ahead and do that while the food processor is running, incorporating that garlic. You'll notice that now we've got something that's very, very liquid. And in fact, it's probably a little bit too runny to be considered a sauce, but you'll see how we deal with that in the cooking process, because the next step is to, I'm going to just scrape these sides down. The next step is to go ahead and cook our sauce. All right, so I've got a saucepan with a little bit of olive oil just coming up to the smoke point. And to that, I'm going to add a tablespoon of flour. We're going to make sort of a simple improvised roux. I'm gonna go ahead and stir that around just to cook it down a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in my sauce. You'll notice that that immediately starts to thicken the sauce mixture. I'm going to use my spatula to scrape down the sides and make sure that I get all of that liquid out. Don't want to waste any of it. And right now I've got the heat on medium low. I'm going to go ahead and turn that up to a medium high. And I'm going to go from my spatula to a whisk, just to make sure that it's well incorporated. And then I'm going to add a secret ingredient, which is a little bit of sherry cooking wine. This is going to add a nice depth of flavor and really elevate the sauce. I'm going to use about 2 tablespoons of cooking wine. And again, I'm going to mix that in. It smells really good. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up, the heat up, so that we get to just before a boil. And then we're going to go ahead and reduce it down to a simmer, allowing the alcohol to cook out and the sauce to reduce and thicken up a little bit. But you'll notice that we've got a nice smooth consistency for the sauce, and you'll notice how it sticks to the spatula, which is how we know that it's not too runny. All right, we've got that boil coming up, so let's go ahead and reduce that down to a simmer. And we'll just let that go uncovered on the pan in the pan on the stove while we finish the final components of our meal. We've got our parboiled potatoes here. We've got some string beans here, and of course we've got our piece of salmon. We're gonna season each of these components very, very simply. One thing they're all gonna get is salt, so I'm going to go ahead and use, again, our pink Himalayan salt because it's a little bit more flavorful of the sea salts. And I'm going to go ahead and season our potatoes. I'm going to season our string beans, and I'm going to season our salmon. All of them on just one side. I'm going to go ahead and give them all some pepper. Just plain black pepper. Now I'm going to give them all some garlic. Salt, pepper, and garlic are pretty standard and common base seasonings. You can use them on pretty much everything from vegetables to seafoods to meat. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Now that we've got the base seasoning done, we're gonna go ahead and add a little bit of our flavor profile. We're gonna go ahead and diverge to give a different flavor for each of the components. For the potatoes, we're gonna go ahead and go back to our Indian spice, and we're going to use the garam masala on both the white and the sweet potatoes. It's gonna be a warm spice mixture that we're adding to our potatoes. Then to our fish, we're going to go ahead and add tarragon. Tarragon is a light sort of licoricey herb that complements fish very, very nicely. It's mild, and we don't want to do too much flavor to our fish or to our other components as well, because we've got very, very flavorful sauces and side dishes that we're going to be adding to that we created with the beans. Let's add a nice herb crust to that salmon. And then to the salmon, we're going to go ahead and add some lemon zest to the salmon, as well as to our string beans. And then lastly, we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of lemon juice to the salmon and to our string beans. Let's go ahead and get these cooked. All right, so we're back to our flat cast iron skillet, and you can see that I've gone ahead and put our piece of salmon in along with our sweet and our white potatoes. I have put them in seasoned side down, and I've gone ahead and seasoned the other side in pan. I'm going to go ahead and just give these roughly 3 or 4 minutes per side. Remember, the potatoes have already par cooked, so we don't have a whole lot of cooking to do with them. It's mostly to get some color and brownness on them. And then the salmon, we want to cook that through to about a medium rare. So we can go ahead and start to flip the salmon. Nice. Go ahead and flip these. Getting a little char on those potatoes. Very, very nice. That's what we're looking for. Beautiful. You don't want to let the potatoes go for too long, just enough to get some color on them, but you don't want for the potatoes to dry out and be dry. Same thing goes for the salmon. So we'll let All right, so we've gone ahead and we've plated this up. It's sort of a family style meal, so we've got a lot of components. We've got our vegetables, we've got our veggie balls, we've got our veggie patties, we've got our potatoes, we've got our puree in the middle, and we've got our piece of salmon for any of the meat eaters. Obviously, you could subtract any one of these elements. I've put a little bit of sour cream on these just to cool off some of the spice elements. You could use a yogurt instead, or you could go completely dairy-free. Again, the point of using these different kinds of components is to show that you can work in healthy vegetarian and vegan options, but you can augment them with the things that people are used to eating if they aren't yet ready to make that full switch, and up the health quotient in whatever it is that you're cooking. Let's give it a taste. I'm gonna start with the patties. Now, with these patties, the nice thing about them is they hold together pretty well. They are a firm sort of meat-like consistency. The bean texture comes through. The mildness of the patty goes well with the sauce that we've applied to them. It has a little bit more of a kick to it because there's a little bit more cayenne pepper and some of that garam masala. I've gone ahead and added a little bit of sriracha onto it. So it's nice to have that sort of milder base in the patty. Because we use that fennel and coriander mixture, it does give us a very meat-like consistency. I'm gonna go ahead and give one of these veggie balls a taste. Gonna get one that's got some sauce on it as well. You see that again, they hold up really, really well. It's got the same mouthfeel as a meatball. It's got a lot of that same consistency. We've got a nice little crunch on that coating because we use that flour, and we got a nice sear on the outside of those balls. I'm gonna go ahead and give some of this potato a taste. This is gonna have a little bit more of the Indian spices in the sweet potato. And in the white, what's interesting is that the sweet potato and the white potato actually work really well together. It's nice to get both of them on the fork, especially because we've gone ahead and got a sear on those. You've got those nicely toasted, and we haven't gone ahead and overcooked them, so they're not dry. They're still very, very moist, and all of the seasoning and the spices that we've used come through. Our salmon is interesting because salmon is a flavorful fish. We've used a mild herb seasoning, and it's a very, very nice component to complement some of the heavier, more earthy flavors and consistencies that we've got going on with a lot of these bean components. The salmon and also our lemon zested string beans provide a nice counterbalance, a nice acidity, a nice lightness to complement a lot of the heavy flavors that are going on with the bean components. And then lastly, our puree, which is again a version of all the other things that we've been eating. It's a very nice component, it's a very nice finishing element, keeps things a little bit lighter, a little bit smoother. It's an excellent foil to some of the heavier and crispier components that we've got going on in the patty and in the veggie balls. That's our meal. I really hope you give at least one or two of these a try. The nice thing about this is that it shows how you can take one element like a bean that is a super healthy, fiber-rich vegan element, and use it in multiple ways to create a platter, a family-style platter like this, or any one of these components could be a very nice lunch. You could use this puree or the sauce for breakfast over eggs if you weren't going completely vegan. There's a lot of different directions and ways that you can take this. It's really good for summer, but also a very nice fall dish to make. So give this a try, and let's work on getting some of these healthier options into our diets, even if you aren't going full-on vegan. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on our next episode. Wakusu.